Welcome to the VB Toolbox. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to do mass control updates. Something that can be really tedious, and there's some nice little tricks to kind of help alleviate some of that pain. And I'll show you what I mean here. Just to set the stage, if you'll look at the form that I have here, you notice that I have numerous text boxes and checkboxes on the form, and I need to update them all whenever a certain action occurs. And what I see a lot of, if we jump into the code, is this sort of situation where we have, when I start this, let me just show you here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to be able to type in my text boxes. Say I've got a database application here and I want to enable it so the user can enter values. So I want to clear the form. And I click the clear form and it works. But it's not efficiently coded. And if we had several forms, imagine if your application had a tab control with numerous tabs on it. You may have this same situation on several tabs, and this list can get huge, because we're doing three different things when we click this button. When we enable the text box so we can type in it, then we clear the text in the text box, and then we check all these check boxes because we want those checked for some reason. And this happens a lot. And this is just for this one page. Now imagine, like I said before, if you had a tab control with several of these forms going on, that could get really big in your code. And so there must be an easier way to accomplish what we want to do. Now what I could do alternatively is a more efficient means of clearing the form. It does the exact same thing. But it uses a little different code. What I do instead is I cycle through, let me go down here and show you. So I cycle through the controls on the main form and find any text boxes that I can, and if a text box is found in this loop, it sets the enabled property to true, and it sets the text property to be blank. Okay, same as clearing it essentially. And then I go through and check all the checkboxes. So I repeat this process each time, for each control type. Now it's a lot better than this up here, but it still could be a bit more efficient. And imagine again if we have several different tabs and form controls. So I'm going to show you one more limitation. Actually, you probably already saw it. When we clicked that clear better, it cleared everything out properly and checked all the boxes, but it didn't clear this group box. And the reason why is because this group box has a control collection all of its own. And so when we run it against the main form, it doesn't even hit this group box collection. So essentially what I want to do is create something sort of like this, okay, where we can choose what sort of updates we want to make, and how each group is affected. Or we can actually recursively go through the entire form and all of the child groups and clear everything if we wanted to. So go ahead and just jump into it now. I'm sorry that was such a long introduction, but I kind of wanted to show you what we're up against. So what I want to do is create a method that's really flexible and can handle pretty much any type of object on your form or any other part of your application. So a single sub that we can work with to do all of this. It's going to be a little bit more complex than, I wouldn't call it exactly a absolute beginner tutorial, but it's worthwhile to know. It's good stuff. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to create a new project for my start page. I want a Windows Forms application. You can call it mass control updates, whatever you want. I'm just going to call it control updates. Actually, I'll do mass control updates. So if I end up sharing the project source, as I often do, it'll be easy to find. Click OK. That'll generate your project template. And we can stretch that out a little bit so you have some space to work with. And first thing I'm going to do, as usual, I'm going to add a few controls to the window. I'm going to go ahead and add some buttons here. You can right click on that, copy and paste it a few times. I want 4 of these. Alright, so I'll try to mirror what I had before for my demonstration. Alright, I'm going to stretch this one out a little bit so I can put a little more text. And next up I want to add some text boxes for the example. And you can Control C and Control V that, or do a copy and paste. And let's throw some checkboxes on here as well. We're not going to get fancy with the names or anything in this one because it's going to work the same regardless. Okay, so now I want to add a couple of group boxes. Here's my group box. Bring that down. I wonder if I can copy and paste that. There we go, yeah. Paste that on the main form. Sweet. Alright, so I'm going to change a few of the text properties here real quick. I'm going to just go to the text property down in my properties window. I'm just going to call this child collection 1. And I'm doing that because this control, all of these controls are children of the main form control. Okay, so form 1 has a control collection. Inside of that control collection are these other controls, and of course some of those controls have collections of their own. So that's kind of how that works. Alright, once I have these established, I'm just going to go ahead and toss a couple of these. I'm going to Control C, Control V, paste those into the group box. Now when you do that, when you take a text box and put it either from your window over here or copy and paste it into and drop it in a group box, it becomes, the group box becomes the parent of those controls. Okay, so these are no longer in form 1's control box. Okay, they're in this group box's control box. I'll call that one child collection 2. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as I had it before. I just want it similar. I'm going to grab these checkboxes. I'm going to do the same thing. Control C, come in here, paste them. Okay, and then I'm going to grab all of those, Control C again, come down here just to save some time. Alright, so I'm going to update the text in here. Just say ABC, change the text property, 1, 2, 3. So we'll just pretend that we are working on an application form and the default values are what we see, and we want to clear them out before we begin working. I'm just putting in arbitrary values here. Trying to be quick. I know I have a tendency to make my tutorials a little bit too long. I've had a lot of complaints about that. Alright. So for this button, I'm just going to change the text to clear form fields. And I'm going to change this one to update group 1. Doesn't matter. And I will change the text here to update group 2. And finally, change this guy to update all fields. Okay, So we should have a nice basic form to work with here, and we have one main control container and two child control containers to work with. So to get started, we'll press F7 or double click on your main form to generate your coding environment here. All right, and from here I'm going to create a new sub, and I call it a private sub, and I will just name it update controls. And for the parameters of this sub, we're going to have a few different things that we want to push into this. One being the parent that we're referencing. So we want to tell it which object, which control collection do we want to update. The parent being either the main form as the parent, or being group 1 as a parent, or group 2. So anything that has a control collection will be our parent. So we'll just name this parameter parent, and we're going to pass it as an object because it might be a different object type each time. Like you saw, we have text boxes and checkboxes, so we want this to sort of be agnostic and not care what kind of control we pass into it. Actually, I misspoke there. Being that the parent is not the text box or the sorry, my mind just went blank there for a second. The parent, like I said before, is the collection, the collection control, not the checkboxes like I just erroneously stated. Alright, so here, next up, is where we will add the control property, or I'm sorry, the control type, specifically the text box or the checkbox or any other form control that you want to mass update. So I'll say type, control type as a string. And the reason we're calling this as a string as opposed to an object, since we made this object not care if it was a form object or a group box, that's what I was trying to say before. We're going to be calling the text box or checkbox by its native name, being that it's literally a text box or a checkbox. And here we're going to do the control property that we want to access. Okay, this could be as we look through these form controls, you look down here in your properties windows, these are the properties that you have access to, and you can update, whether it's multi-line or read-only or enabled or disabled. All of those properties can be changed, including the coloring and whatnot. So as long as you know the name of the property, and this is important, you have to call that property as it's written here. And it is case sensitive, I believe. So in this case with 4-color, the capital F and a capital C. So keep that in mind. For example, the text box is a capital T and a capital B as well. So for the control property, we're going to pass that also as a string because we just want the string name of the property that we want to update. And then we want to have a value property to set the new value. And this value also needs to be agnostic. It can't care one way or the other what type of value is passed, whether it's a Boolean, an integer, or a string, or any other thing. So let's say value is an object. And now we're going to add an optional parameter. And this parameter is going to be whether or not it's recursive, meaning whether or not this loops through itself again under a certain situation. And the reason we're going to be using this is for this update all. And you noticed how if I cleared the form fields before in that other application, it only affected the controls that were on form 1. It didn't touch the ones that were in the child collections. So what we're going to do is say loop through all of the collections on the form, all of the parents, and update all of them individually. So we don't have to manually add more code for every single one of those. So I'm going to say optional. It's an optional parameter, recursive as a Boolean. Okay, so it's going to be true or false. Do you want it to be recursive or not? And by default, we have to set a value, and I'm going to say false. I don't want it to assume that I want to loop through every child collection on the form. Okay, so I know that's a lot of parameters to deal with, but it's well worth it in the end. And now that we've created our handy dandy sub, we can go ahead and begin building it. So the first thing I want to do is check to make sure that the parent that's being called in this parameter actually is or has a container. Okay, so say I accidentally passed the text box as the parent. I don't believe a text box has its own control collection, so it would probably crash on us if we tried looping it. So what I wanted to do is just quietly and gracefully close out without an error. So I'm going to say, wow, getting ahead of myself, abort if no control collection found. And to do this, all we have to do is say if parent.getType. And the reason we're using getType a lot is because we're using these agnostic variable or data types like object. By default, you know, it doesn't understand exactly what kind of object it is. But when it uses getType, it can return, it'll say, oh, hey, it's a form. Or, oh, hey, it's a group box, or, you know. So this helps it locate its type, and then we can call its methods from there. We can say get property, and just, I don't want to get ahead of myself. There are a lot of different options here, including the ability to execute functions and methods, subs from the parent, but let's get back on task here. So what we want to do is we want to get a specific property from the parent, okay? And the property we want to get is controls. And we want to ask if it's nothing. So if it's a null value, meaning that the parent literally does not have a control collection, then exit the sub. Okay. So what I could do, just to kind of reinforce this a little bit, if I say me, that being form 1 dot controls, notice how it has a controls property, okay? And this control collection is or these controls exist as a control collection, okay? So it's a collection of all the different controls that the form contains, text boxes or whatever. So you can kind of see what we're doing here, and we're looking for this by its name, and sure enough, it's found. So if we passed form 1 as the parent, it's going to be perfectly happy with it. If I tried passing a text box or some other control that didn't have this property, it would not work. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of reinforce that a little bit. So, all right, once we have established that the parent is a legitimate container, we'll say loop through the parent control collection and update the controls. All right, and we're going to do this much like I showed you in the other form. We're going to say for each C as a control, and that control is kind of similar to an object type. It's sort of agnostic. It doesn't care whether it's a text box, a checkbox, or any other control type. So for each C as control in the parent dot controls, looping through the control collection, we'll say if C, get the type of C because it wants to know that, and we want to get the name of the type. Okay, so we're going to return this name as a string, and this name is not the same as the name property that we see over here. When I click on one of my objects or my controls, each one has its own name property. This is not the name property that we are returning here. Rather, it's the type of control. Okay, in this case, say I sent the parent was form 1 and the control type came through as a text box. Okay, it's going to say, you know, gettype.name is a text box. I hope that makes sense. And so what I want to do is say if c.gettype.name equals, in this case it would be something like text box, but we're going to be passing that string in through the control type here. Okay. So if a text box is found in the control collection, then it's going to do its business. So we'll say c dot get type, and we want to call the get property. So it's going to find properties specifically for a text box, for example. And here we might say something like enabled. Okay, if we, whoops, and if you do it wrong, if you don't name it exactly the same, it's not going to work. So we might say get the enabled property, and is it true or false? What do we want to set it to? Or get the text property and set the text equal to hello VB toolbox. Again, we're going to be passing this dynamically through the parameter. So we want to say control property. Okay, so that gives you the ability and flexibility to use this on any kind of control instead of being locked into, you know, manually coding each and every loop for every control type on your form. So control property, okay, we want to say if the control property get property is not nothing, then, and what I'm doing here is just like I did up here, I want to make sure that the property that I asked for exists. Trying to think of one. Yeah, okay, so the text box control has a multi-line value. Okay, if I set that multi-line value on a checkbox, it's going to be like multi-line value? What do you mean there? And it's not going to be happy. So I want it to do nothing if the property that we asked for doesn't exist on that control, rather than crashing on us because it can't find it. So if the property exists, then we'll say c.getType again, get property, control property that we asked for, dot set value. And the set value method takes 3 parameters, one of which we will not use. The first being the object that we want to update, and we're retrieving that object from C. Okay, so that object is going to be C. Whatever form control it's looking at the moment is the one that's getting updated, assuming all of these if statements check out. And then we have to tell it what value we want to add here. And so the value is going to be pulled from here. It's that object type again. So I'm going to say value. That could be a Boolean, integer, string, whatever. And for the index value, since we really have no need for this, we're just going to pass a null value into that by saying nothing. Okay. All right. Now, trying to think, can we test this? thinking that should work. So let's just throw into one of these buttons here. I'm going to just use this first one, and I want to set the value of my checkboxes to true. So if I call update controls parent, the parent object in this case, because I just want to do the main form, is just going to be me. Whenever you're referencing the form that you're working on, use the me keyword. And for the control type, I want to update the checkboxes. So I want specifically a checkbox, and the property that I want to update is the checked value. And the value that I want to set them to is going to be true. Remember, those take a Boolean value. And do I want it to be recursive? No. We haven't programmed the recursion yet in case we want to loop through the form. So if we had, then if I click that, it should cycle all the way through it and do it. But as you can see, it's working properly. Let's tweak that a little bit just to test. Say text box. And I want to change the text property. And this time, instead of passing a Boolean value, I need to pass a string value. Hello, VB Toolbox. And again, no recursion. And it should set all the form fields to Hello VB Toolbox. So that's working beautifully. And this is now, it doesn't care what kind of control you're looking at. You can just go ahead and mass update them. Now let's get some recursion going on here. So actually, let's do one more test. Let's change the parent. I want to change the parent to group box 1. Okay. And you do call it by the name here, group box 1, as you can see. So if we go ahead and run that, look at that. Notice how it didn't touch these guys this time, because it's looking in a different parent container. So now let's go ahead and program in some recursion to make it cycle through all of the available controls. And I think I kind of jumped ahead there a little bit. We went ahead and tested everything. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to me. Try to get us back on course here. It seems a little silly to do so. I'm just going to go ahead and set this button to mass update that group. Oops, not group 1. It's got to be group box 1. Got to call it by its name. And you could, yeah, we just want to do text box. Completely redundant here, but yeah. So as you can see, we can, it's nice to be able to have a reusable one-liner instead of like I showed you before, we had just multiple lines, and every single type had to have its own line. Each group has to have its own line, for each loop, and those really build up in the course of a larger application. In this case, you've got one kind of large sub that you got to deal with, and then you can just reuse that sub over and over for any purpose. Makes it a lot more efficient. And there may be other ways to do this that are even better than this, but I find this one pretty handy. So let's go ahead and add one last thing to this, and then we'll call this tutorial good. I'm going to come back up to my update controls, and we're going to check and see if this recursion has been turned on. And if it has, so we say check for child control containers. Oops, not containers. And repeat sub until all controls are updated. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll say if recursive equals true, then for each CC as a child container, CC as control, for each control in parent dot controls, if CC, gotta get the type, dot get property, controls is not nothing, then okay, so just to explain what I'm doing here, just like we did up here where we check for a specific property, in this case we just want to know if whatever control type or whatever parent we used has controls within its container, its collection. If there's a property called controls, then proceed to rerun the same sub that we ran from within itself. That makes it kind of a cycle. So we'll say update controls child container as the new parent. So it's going to go through here, go through its controls, find any controls within its collection that are also containers, and then that container becomes the new parent, okay? And it's going to cycle through them. The control type is going to be just like it was before. Control type, control property, and the value. And here we want to say recursive equals true. Okay, so this tells it it's like a ripple effect. Okay, first control it hits that you pass in from your main form, in this case being the form itself, goes through, finds a control that has a container, searches that container, changes all the controls to whatever we set the new property to, and then loops through that container for any other control containers, and it just keeps going down until it hits the very end. So it's just gonna cascade down. It's pretty cool how that works. So haven't really done anything. I think that's really all we need here. So once we have our cascading effect, let's go ahead and add this to the update all fields, and we'll test this a couple of times. In this case, I want the master, the parent, to be the main form, and I want it to ripple down or cascade down through the form, through all of its child controls, change all the TextBox.text properties to hello VB toolbox, and make sure, now this time we're actually going to tell it to be recursive because we want it to update the entire form. Now recursion just gives us control over which subgroups we update. If we don't want to update the entire form, you can just, grab specific ones. Very handy. So as you can see, it doesn't care where it's at now. It just goes through and checks everything. Now we're gonna throw a curveball here. Say checkbox. And you notice what I did. I left the text property. Does a checkbox have a text property? Is that going to work? Yeah, of course it does. That's this guy right over here. See, if you look down your properties window, it says checkbox 6. So I'm going to sort of do the same thing. Check that out. So we just changed a different property. You can use this now to change pretty much anything, I think. One thing I've never tried is like sending a color through. That would be interesting. Could be kind of fun. I think it's the back color for the text box. Let's come up here, back color. Now, I don't know if this will work. I don't see why it wouldn't, but for the value, this has got to be a color value, right? I wonder if I can just say color dot. Let's do cyan, and we'll make it recursive. This may explode on me. I have no idea. We're just kind of getting crazy now. Oh, it works. Yeah, sweet. Okay, so, well, there you have it. No more of that, you know, duplicating all your efforts. You just create this one sub, and then you can reuse it over and over again very simply with a one-liner. And you can change the properties on pretty much any control type that you have access to. And there's all sorts of goodies you can do. And again, like I said before, once you add that recursion, it shouldn't matter how many containers within containers you have. So you can get all inception on this guy and you know, add another group box to this group box, and that, you know, this becomes a child of this, and this becomes a child of this, and so that's pretty wild stuff. I hope this has been a helpful tutorial for some of you. I know it's kind of a specific topic and maybe not a lot of applications out there, but this does seem to be a very common issue that I've seen, and hopefully this will kind of make your life a little easier in the future. No more crazy duplication of control properties on in your coding. So anyway, I wish you all well on your projects. Thanks for coming along, and take care, everybody.